We can begin. Hi all, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jessica Teggy, and I am Restoration Program Manager for Ohio River Foundation. Let me continue here. Okay, still getting set up. Okay, so yes, I am Jessica Teggy, and I am Restoration Program Manager for Ohio River Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization helping to coordinate the efforts of the Ohio River Valley CISMA, which are the two programs that help to make this webinar possible today. We'll talk about more in a little bit, but we are very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Denis Conover. He is a current professor at the University of Cincinnati, and today's topic is an important one: invasive invasion, how to identify invasive plants and stop them in their tracks. So we will cover non-native invasive plant ID, some of the negative ecological impacts that these species have on our native environments, and what you can do to help. So today's presentation is going to focus mainly on finding and removing the invasive species in your yard. So we invite you to join us again on August 30th for a presentation on native alternatives, what to plant in their place. So on August 30th at 10 a.m., we will have Corey Christopher on. He is Cincinnati Nature Center Director of Conservation, to discuss and answer any questions that you may have. All right, so let's give a little love to the organizations that made this happen. Ohio River Valley CISMA stands for Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, and Ohio River Foundation. So let's start with the CISMA. ORV CISMA, Ohio River Valley CISMA, is a coalition of organizations and agencies and businesses that are all working together to control invasive species in a 22 county area of the Ohio River Valley. So there are other CISMAs across the US, but if you live in any of the counties highlighted on your screen there, we, Ohio River Valley CISMA, is your CISMA, so welcome home. The premise is, if you can believe it, invasive species aren't great at following property lines or even state lines, and they're spreading really, really quickly, which is truly devastating our native plant populations. It's also leading to a decrease in biodiversity. It's creating poorer habitats for wildlife, including the pollinators that help our food supply, and it even lowers water quality. We recognize that a coordinated approach offers the best chance of managing their spread. And on the CISMA website, we offer homeowners educational materials and educational opportunities and volunteer events located all over the tri-state, where we encourage folks to come out and learn about the invasive species taking over their neck of the woods and how best to remove them. So please go check us out. We are even developing an interactive invasive species removal counter, and our goal is 1 million invasive plants removed. So we need your help, but check back in early September to submit your contribution. And that can be found at orvcisma.org, and that website will be on the screen later on as well. Okay, Ohio River Foundation also gets a shout out. Ohio River Foundation is a 22-year-old environmental nonprofit agency focused on environmental advocacy, habitat restoration, and education. We play mostly in Cincinnati and Greater Columbus and even in Lexington. For education, since 2005, ORF has reached over 50,000 students between our two educational programs, one being our River Explorer program. We have a picture there. We take kids out to the creek, let them splash around and teach them something. And then we have our newer program called Mussels in the Classroom, where we come to them and drop off native freshwater mussels, and they get to keep them in their classroom in a tank for 2 weeks. And that's been it's always a good time, always fun. And then our restoration program, we, through invasive species removal, native plantings, dam removals, we are able to restore about 25 acres of land every single year, which bolsters native animal and plant populations. Just wanted to give a quick shout out because if you signed up for this webinar, you are obviously interested in improving our habitats. And we do a lot of that with Ohio River Foundation. So if you are looking for volunteer opportunities, whether that is invasive species removal, tree plantings, live stake installations, please visit us. We have events almost year-round, volunteer opportunities that also double as educational opportunities. So visit us at ohioriverfdn.org to learn more. And we're always looking for new members. Maybe you're not ready to volunteer right now. We welcome you to become a member of Ohio River Foundation. Okay, without further ado, it's time for what everyone has been waiting for. So Dr. Denis Conover, our speaker today, is currently a professor at the University of Cincinnati in the Department of Biological Sciences. His research focuses on various aspects of ecological restoration, including plant surveys of natural areas such as wetlands, forests, prairies. And through this work, he's even discovered rare native plants, which is super cool. And he's also studying control methods for non-native invasive species, some familiar names for Amur honeysuckle, winter creeper, and more, which present a major threat to the preservation of our native plant species. Dr. Denis Conover received his bachelor's and his master's from University of Dayton and his Ph.D. from the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Conover has published many peer-reviewed publications during his career, and the most recent covers how dramatically natural areas in Southwestern Ohio have changed in the past 200 years due to non-native invasive plants that were believed to spread from our yards and our own garden beds. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Denis Conover, and there may be questions throughout this, so please post them in the chat and we will get to them later. So Denis, you are free to take the screen here.
Okay.
What does it say? Ask her to stop sharing the screen.
Okay, here we go. Can you see this?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Try now. Let's try hitting. Oh, click on the. Oh, sorry. Click on the. And get a full screen again. There we go. And then go to share screen. And then click on your screen.
Okay. Can you see? All right. Sorry about that.
No.
Anyway, thanks everybody for coming today. As you may or may not be aware, there are lots of non-native invasive plants that are starting to take over our nature preserves here in Southwestern Ohio. And the problem seems to be getting worse every year with new species popping up. Just about every time I go out in the woods, I'll find a new species showing up. So for the past few years, I've been working on a botanical survey. It's sort of a follow-up to two earlier surveys. One was conducted by Thomas Lee in 1834, and the second was done by E. Lucy Braun in 1934. So this is a follow-up to those two earlier surveys. And one of the most striking differences between the present time and the previous surveys is the large number of non-native invasive species that are now present here in Southwestern Ohio. And to illustrate this, I want to show you a little news clip. This was recorded at the Avon Woods Nature Preserve. And then the second part of it was recorded at Bender Mountain Preserve. And this can show you that it is possible to bring back the native plants if you control the invasive species while the native seed bank is still viable.
If you struggle to lose weight, you must see this. A fact-dissolving loophole has just been.
Alien species are taking over. Now, this isn't exactly what you might think, though. Our local forests and parks are changing, and it's happening fast enough that a walk through the woods could look completely different for your kids than it did for you. Local 12's Josh Knight went for a hike with experts to see what's going on.
This English ivy, and this stuff will take over. So all these native plants are at risk.
Experts say our local forests evolved over millions of years to support and control hundreds of different types of plants and animals.
So anybody who enjoys being out in nature and enjoys seeing the flowers and the trees and the wildlife needs to be concerned about protecting the native plants.
Denis Conover teaches biology at UC. He's seen what invasive plants like the winter creeper do through the years.
As you can see, it's covering almost every square inch of the ground.
They take over and essentially choke out other plants. Plants like this are originally planted in people's gardens, but birds eat the berries and drop the seeds somewhere else. In a matter of decades, you might only see a few different types of plants.
Where before you had several hundred species of native wildflowers, trees, and shrubs, plus all the animals that depend on those plants.
And here is the Amur Honeysuckle, public enemy number one. But there is good news. In the Western Wildlife Corridor, they're proving it's not too late.
The honeysuckle used to be everywhere, right where we're standing. As far as you can see, this was really thick honeysuckle bushes.
Tim Sisson and volunteers cut back the invasive shrubs, treated the stumps, and hoped the native plants could bounce back. And they really did. He says springtime is beautiful.
Then it's truly spectacular. We literally have a carpet of wildflowers all up through here.
Sisson says they're proof people can help.
We're doing it. You can beat back the invasive alien plants and have a nice nature preserve.
Josh Knight, Local 12 News.
I love honeysuckle. It smells so good. Dr. Conover says you can help right now by using native plants in your own garden. And if you'd like to find examples or you just want to get involved in a more hands-on way, just go to local12.com, click on that red Get It button.
Okay, she loves honeysuckle. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so there are very many non-native invasive species here in Southwestern Ohio. Most were introduced intentionally, largely by the horticulture trade as ornamentals. Three of the more common exotic woody invaders in our forests now are the Amur honeysuckle, the winter creeper, and English ivy. This is at Avon Woods Nature Preserve. So here you can see the Amur honeysuckle, English ivy, and winter creeper. And the winter creeper and the English ivy, originally they were used as ground covers, but they will climb trees and they'll produce berries that are eaten by birds and mammals, and they get dispersed in that fashion. So Amur honeysuckle shrubs can produce many thousands of berries per shrub. Winter creeper, the fruits are capsules, but the seeds have a red coating on them called an aril, which is attractive to birds. And then these are the English ivy berries, which are also eaten by birds. The Amur honeysuckle was imported around 1898 through the New York Botanical Garden as an ornamental. And by 1961, when Lizzie Braun published The Woody Plants of Ohio, which is a book I highly recommend, Amur honeysuckle was just starting to show up as an escape from cultivation here in Hamilton County. It wasn't found in the other counties in Ohio at that time. But now it's very widespread in Ohio and all over the Midwest. And the honeysuckle patches can be so dense in the forest that hardly anything else is able to grow under it. So the only native plants that you might have left in a forest like that are the trees that are poking up through the top of the honeysuckle that were there before the honeysuckle invaded. But those trees will not be able to regenerate underneath that honeysuckle. So when those trees die, you might lose everything and just have a monoculture of Amur honeysuckle. One of the good things about Amur honeysuckle is it can be easily killed in various ways. Plus, it doesn't have thorns on it and it doesn't send up root sprouts. But it can be killed by foliar spraying with a 2% glyphosate solution, or you can cut it off at the base and apply herbicide to the cut stump. Now, Tim Sisson, who you saw in that little video of the Western Wildlife Corridor, said that for cut stump treatment of honeysuckle, they use a 20% solution of glyphosate. So you just cut the shrub off at ground level and then spray or brush the herbicide onto the cut stump. And that'll keep it from resprouting. It's most important to get the herbicide along where the cambium layer is, along the outer edge here. This has a dye in it so they can see where they've applied the herbicide. Now, winter creeper in the Woody Plants of Ohio, 1961, Lucy Braun said that winter creeper was just starting to show up as an escape here in Ohio. Now it's just incredibly abundant. And when it climbs trees and gets exposed to more light, it will flower and produce fruits. But it can also do that even if it's growing on the ground. Here at the university, they have big mounds covered with winter creeper that are starting to flower now, and those will also produce berries. And then these are eaten by birds. Okay, so in some of the nature preserves like Avon Woods and Burnett Woods, Caldwell Preserve and so forth, the forest floor is becoming covered with English ivy and winter creeper. Now, the fact that winter creeper and English ivy stay green all winter makes them vulnerable because their leaves will stay green while the native plants are dormant during the winter. So if you get a warm spell, let's say in January, you can spray the leaves of the winter creeper and the English ivy, and the herbicide will be taken up into the leaves and then translocated to the roots and the buds and that can kill the plants. Now, Tim Sisson says for winter creeper, I use a 2% triclopyr solution. So that would be like Garlon for foliar spraying. And then you need to add a surfactant because of the waxiness of the leaves to help get the herbicide inside of the leaves. Tim Sisson says he uses something called grip stick as a surfactant with the triclopyr. English ivy, Tim says he uses a 2% glyphosate solution, and as the surfactant, he uses Dawn dishwashing liquid, which will help to get it to penetrate. The winter creeper and English ivy vines that are climbing up the trees can be cut off at ground level, and then you apply the herbicide to the cut stumps, just as you would with the Amur honeysuckle. Now, I would warn that you have to be careful when you're doing that. Make sure you do not kill the native grape species or the native Virginia creeper, because those are very important for wildlife. Many types of insects, will feed on the grape leaves, and then the birds will feed on the caterpillars. But English ivy and winter creeper, you can just cut them off like this and then put the herbicide onto the cut stump, and that will kill them and keep them from resprouting. 20% glyphosate is what you would use on these cut stumps. Now, if you do use herbicide, please make sure that you follow the directions on the labels. Don't get the herbicide on your skin. Don't get it in your eyes. Don't inhale it. Don't swallow it. And don't get it on the native plants because it will kill them. Now, besides the Amur honeysuckle and winter creeper and English ivy, there are many other exotic invasives showing up now here in Southwestern Ohio. And I won't be able to talk about all of them, but I just wanted to show you a few of them. Okay, so this would be the calorie pear. And birds like starlings like to eat the little pears, and that's how the seeds are being dispersed. Multiflora rose. The white mulberry. The white mulberry was introduced as food for the caterpillars of the silk moths. And the silk industry failed miserably, but the white mulberry succeeded triumphantly. And unfortunately, the white mulberry hybridizes with our native red mulberry. So many of the plants that you see out there now are actually hybrids. Japanese barberry, the Norway maple. Seeds of the Norway maple and the English maple are dispersed by the wind, so they're able to get around. And there's a variety of this Norway maple that actually has purple leaves that you might be familiar with. The European buckthorn, Rhamnus cathartica, is becoming super abundant now here in Southwestern Ohio. And from the name, you can probably tell that it's not something you'd really want to eat. Although the birds will eat these berries and it makes them go to the bathroom, and that's how the seeds are being dispersed. Japanese jet bead is becoming pretty common in the nature preserves. Mock orange. Porcelain berry. Over the past few years, porcelain berry has become extremely abundant. And it was planted as an ornamental because of the pretty berries that it gets, but birds will eat those, and it's being spread like wildfire now. It's sort of the kudzu of the north. Although now we actually have kudzu of the south here in Ohio as well. Chinese elms, these are commonly planted. They're on the UC campus. They're used as street trees, but the seeds are dispersed by the wind. So these are spreading rapidly. Also the Siberian elm, same problem. The winged euonymus, also called the burning bush because they turn red in the fall. I know some woods that are just covered with this plant now. It's taking over. And make sure you don't confuse this with the native wahoo, which is a native euonymus that is also a shrub. But this one is non-native and highly invasive. The lesser periwinkle, Vinca minor, is another plant that's used as a ground cover that can spread. This is called the Amur cork tree. And this one is starting to show up now out in the natural areas. Rose of Sharon is invasive. Even ginkgo biloba now is starting to show up as an invasive out in natural areas. I know you probably are familiar with the ginkgo seeds. They have this fleshy coating that smells really bad. But believe it or not, animals like to eat those, and they are pooping the seeds out into the nature preserves where it's starting to spread. Autumn olive. Japanese wineberry now is starting to become more and more abundant. They're good to eat, but they're highly invasive. Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vine. This one also stays somewhat evergreen, not totally evergreen, but which gives you an opportunity to spray it when some of the native plants are dormant. This is the Oriental bittersweet, which is highly invasive. It's in the same family as the winter creeper. Tree of heaven. There are a couple species of Asian wisterias that are quite invasive. Lesser celandine is becoming more and more abundant every year around here. This is one you'll find along the Mill Creek and the Ohio River. This is the purple loosestrife. Japanese knotweed. Japanese chaff flower. Japanese stiltgrass. This is Chinese silvergrass. It's called Miscanthus sinensis, which you see in just about everybody's yard. They plant it as an ornamental. But when you see the word sinensis, that means it's from China. And the seeds of this plant are dispersed by the wind. So it's getting out there where it's not supposed to be. Johnson grass. This was actually introduced on purpose. It was called $1 million grass because they thought it was such a great plant. And then eventually it became a weed, and the Monsanto company invented Roundup to kill Johnson grass. So it really was $1 million grass, at least for Monsanto. Garlic mustard. This is called the Chinese yam. 5-leaf Aurelia. The Paulownia is, the seeds are dispersed by the wind, and this one is becoming more and more abundant now. This is a beautiful tree, the mimosa tree or silk tree, but it's highly invasive, unfortunately. This is called the Amur maple, which comes from the same region where the Amur honeysuckle comes from. And it has seeds that are dispersed by the wind. So I'm finding quite a bit of this along the Mill Creek now, which is one of the areas where I'm surveying, following up the Lee and Braun surveys. This is called Siebold's viburnum. This one and some other non-native viburnums are becoming more common now in the nature preserves. This is the weeping Haigan cherry, and it produces cherries, so you might expect it to become invasive, and it is. This is the Asian beautyberry, and it's starting to show up now out in the nature preserves, because birds will eat these pretty berries and disperse the seeds. Now, you might be surprised to learn that kudzu is now here in Cincinnati. There's a huge patch of it over in Spring Grove Village and some other locations. This is over by Eden Park. Here's one you may not have heard of. It's called the Syrian privet. I'm starting to find this down along the Mill Creek. The seeds are dispersed by the wind, but those could also be dispersed by water if they, get into the creek. I even found a kiwi growing wild along Indian Creek, which is a tributary of the Mill Creek. Okay, so control of invasive species is now a huge part of the job faced by land managers. And it looks like this is going to be required in perpetuity. And it's at great expense, monetarily and time-wise. Plus, there's a lot of collateral damage being caused to native plants and wildlife and even humans because of the extensive use of herbicides and chainsaws and other mechanical equipment. In June, we published an article called The Rise of Non-Native Invasive Plants in Wooded Natural Areas in Southwestern Ohio. It's by Conover and Bergstein. It's in the June 2022 issue of Ecological Restoration. And the article is available as open access from the journal to anyone who wants to read it. Okay, that's the end of this PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Dennis. Checking through the chat now. Mike Miller. Now, this is a question about, I think, more about theory. And Dr. Conover, I think he's wondering if you have a theory on this question. So are we ever going to control many of these species, or are we going to think about rethinking our urbanized ecology, living with these species that are not noxious?
I don't see how you're going to be able to kill off all these non-native invasive species. But if you have a special nature preserve that you just are in love with and has some native plants still present, then like the Western Wildlife Corridor and Bender Mountain, you can go in there every week and kill the honeysuckle, kill the English ivy, kill the winter creeper, kill the Japanese chaff flower, kill the lesser celandine, kill the Japanese knotweed. But it's a constant battle. It's something that will have to be carried on indefinitely, I believe. But if you do that, and if you still have some native propagules left in the soil, the native plants will have a chance to come back and re-inhabit some of those areas that were taken over by the invasives. If you wait too long to control the invasive species, you know, the seed bank is not going to last forever. So in those cases, you might have to start reintroducing some of the native plants into those nature preserves. They have not had to do that at Bender Mountain because they got rid of the honeysuckle while the native plants were still able to come back from their seeds and roots and other propagules that were in the soil there. So Bender Mountain's a great example of a success story. But I don't think you're going to achieve that everywhere. And it takes a lot of effort.
And continuous effort.
Yes, as you know. So you're going to kill 1 million non-native plants here? Is that what you said?
Yes, and it's for the general public. So when this is created, we are inviting anyone and everyone within this, the 22 counties that the CISMA covers, to input how many they've removed. And we understand it's an approximation, absolutely an approximation. But the goal is to really bring it to light, create a community, and show that other people are putting in the work. And, you know, and as I was watching all of these pictures and listing all these different names, it's easy to kind of get down. And so if you see a group of people, you know, banding together, I think it could help and kind of improve the morale.
Well, you know, the deer love to eat winter creeper, okay? So in that regard, winter creeper is actually good for the deer. And the honeybees absolutely love the porcelain berry flowers. I mean, on Saturday, I was amongst the porcelain berries in full bloom, and there were literally thousands of honeybees all around me. So even some of these non-native plants, even though they're detrimental to our native plants, might have some benefit. But I think it would be better to have the native plants instead of these non-native invasive species.
Another question, is there a picture key for invasives by ODNR or some other state that would be a good reference for just the general?
Well, you can use this PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a ton of information available on invasive plants now from many, many different organizations. And is Tim Sisson participating in this today? Maybe not. But Tim has written up some really nice information about invasive plants that are found in the Western Wildlife Corridor preserves and how he goes about controlling those. And I'm not sure if that's available on their website or not, but you could try going to the Western Wildlife Corridor website and checking on that.
Any advice to get rid of chameleon plant?
The
That's
what?
the chameleon plant. Jana, if you wanted to unmute, feel free if you wanted to explain.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not familiar either.
I would say you could probably just spray it with Roundup.
That did not work. So it's a very invasive plant that blooms white flowers in the spring, heart-shaped flowers. And leaves start to change to a reddish color as it gets warmer outside. Many rhizomes underground, which burrow under rocks, a rock walkway to other parts of the yard. So it's taking over all of the vegetation in my yard.
Well, if it's a herbaceous species, right? It's not a woody species.
I'm not sure, but I have done Roundup, and that someone suggested glyphosate, and that did not touch it.
Well, okay, if you're using Roundup, especially if the plant has waxy leaves, you want to make sure you spray it on a warm, sunny day.
Yep.
And you might want to add a little dishwashing liquid to the solution to help get the herbicide into the leaf. But if the plant is rapidly photosynthesizing, then the glyphosate will be taken up into the phloem and then translocated to the roots and other parts of the plant. So it should kill it, and you may have to do it, more than once, but
To do that.
I think that would probably take care of it. Just make sure that the conditions are right when you spray it. Make sure it's warm enough and it's sunny, it's translocating, and you should be able to get the glyphosate to all parts of the plant and eventually kill it.
Right, I have done all that.
But you still can't kill it?
No, right now I have tarp trying to smother it.
Well, that should do it. It'll kill everything else too, though.
Exactly.
Yeah, I believe it's Dan Taylor, right? Dan. He said digging it does not work.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, don't do that.
Well, people are probably still planting that. It's probably still available at the nurseries, I would imagine. I'm going to write that down. What do you call it? what did she call it?
Dan has the right name for it. It's called a chameleon plant, but
Chameleon.
if you look in the chat, he has the correct name of it.
All right, I'll look that one up.
Thank-
I'll keep my eyes open. It'll probably be showing up out in the woods here any day now.
Are invasive plants as bad in older human societies, or are we uniquely susceptible to invasive species?
Well, I don't really know about what happened in those other cultures. I do know that a lot of what they were known as plant hunters. They would go from Europe and North America to Asia, especially China, and just wander around looking for plants that could be used as ornamentals or perhaps as new crop plants. And they brought a lot of those plants back to Europe and then to North America. And, you know, people like to plant something in their yard that is different. I mean, they could plant a perfectly beautiful native flowering dogwood tree or sugar maple or some other native shrub, spice bush, but they don't want to do that. They want to plant some exotic, weirdo, horticultural, freakish plant that's different. And then those are the ones that are spreading out into our nature preserves now and taking over. And a lot of the plants that are used by the nursery trade are very easy to propagate. So things like winter creeper and English ivy, you know, all you have to do is just put a little sprig in a glass of water and it'll root, and then you can pot it up and sell it. Sorry. It just annoys me to no end to see people still planting these things.
Absolutely. John asked, is anyone putting together the location data of all of these invasives as they are reported so plans to contain spread can be made and groups warned to be on the alert for new invasives? So, John, this is ideally the goal of the ORV CISMA. That's going to take some work, and we're working on finding funding for that work, but that is definitely the goal. Denis, do you have any input on that?
Well,
location data.
I think there are organizations that you can report the locations of these invasive species to, and then they will add them to their maps. Or if you use like iNaturalist, you know, if you see a plant and you take a picture of it and you get it onto iNaturalist, that would be another way of getting the information out there. So yes, there are ways of reporting that information.
Yeah, Denis, this is Rich Kogan, and we're familiar with Ed's maps, and the coalition has taken a look at that. It's a little bit cumbersome for our purposes, so we're going to still working and look. I'm sorry, keep on working and looking for either the right program or develop our own as we see that that is an important function for us to provide.
Hey, Denis, Mike Miller here. This looks hopeless. And the question I had is about disturbed locations. Disturbed locations appear to be more susceptible to invasives. You know, when I first moved to Cincinnati, all the roadsides and the interstates that were being built were covered by eastern red cedar. Now they're close to the end of their lifespan, and they're very large and starting to die as other invasives take over or have become invasive and take over disturbed sites. Is it likely we're only going to think about maintaining native species exclusively on restricted sites like the Western Wildlife Preserve and some of Great Parks lands that where they actively remove invasives?
Well, I think I fear that is probably the case, because in order to control the invasive species, it requires so much effort that you can't do it everywhere. So you need to focus on those special areas, you know, where you're trying to preserve the native biodiversity. Unless you want to spray the whole county with Roundup, I think you need to focus on certain areas and try to encourage people to get rid of any invasive plants that they have in their yards and plant native plants. You know, if everybody had native plants growing in their yards, that would be like one huge interconnected nature preserve that we could have.
Well, Dennis, Mike Miller again. The other threat are the diseases and insects that are eliminating native species. As you just heard, the ash borer is in Oregon now, and it devastated our trees, 10 years ago, and the standing is just about done, but there's still a lot of it around. And it took out up to 20% of the leaf area index in some forests. So, and you know, the chestnut blight, we've had a series of these. You know, we're seriously likely to lose what we used to call our indigenous forests Lucy Braun once described.
The loss of the ash trees was devastating, and that opened up opportunities for invasive plants to invade those open areas. I mean, I can show you many examples of where the ash trees died, areas that are now covered with Amur honeysuckle and English ivy, winter creeper. So hopefully some native trees will be able to fill the void left by the dead ash trees. That's sort of what happened when, 40% of the Appalachian forest was covered with American chestnut. But then when the American chestnuts were wiped out by the fungus that was introduced on a Asian chestnut, it's another invasive species. Some other native species were able to fill the void vacated by the American chestnut, things like chestnut oaks, for instance, and other species of oaks. So it'll be interesting to see if any of the native trees are able to take over for the lost ash trees. And there may be some species of ash, like the blue ash, that are more resistant to the ash borer. So maybe those will increase in frequency.
And I don't want to interrupt. I know we could talk forever on this topic, but we are unfortunately out of time. So I want to say thank you again. Thank you to all the folks that were able to hang out with us today. Thank you to Dr. Conover for your expertise and your time. And thanks to UC for allowing us to steal you away for an hour. If anyone has questions at a later time, please don't hesitate to reach out. Pencil down the contact information on the screen. Please do not forget our next webinar will cover what to plant after the invasives are removed. It's cleverly called Filling the Void. We'll bring Cincinnati Nature Center's Director of Conservation on, Corey Christopher. Please mark your calendars, August 30th at 10 a.m. Keep an eye out for that announcement and registration link coming to an inbox near you. Everyone, thank you again and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And go take care of those invasives.
Thank you.